Hello, I'm Sam.
And I'm Diana.
We are co-founders of Creative Jungle Company and we're very excited to get creative with you today.
You'll be guided through the watercolor session by our master illustrator, Abby Hobbs. It's going to be amazing. Are you ready to get creative? Before we get started, let's go through what's inside the box. In the kit, you'll have an instruction booklet with all the exercises that you'll go through, an A5 pad of watercolor paper, a pencil, paint brushes, a palette of watercolor paints. You also get a tea bag, so pop the kettle on and get yourself a brew. Cheers! You also get an MYO discount card, which you can use against the kits and the classes in the studio. And now Abby will guide you through the next steps. You'll learn some tips and tricks to paint, a colour wheel where you'll learn to mix your colours, and learn how to paint lovely foliage scenes such as this, or this, which is one of my favourites, and many more Abby will show you. And I can't wait to see what you make. You guys are going to be great.
Hello, I am Abby, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use your Creative Jungle Company's watercolour kit, which is very exciting. And you can watch this video through and then follow along afterwards, or you can follow along at the same time and pause as you go. It's completely up to you. What you will also need is some kitchen roll or tissues and some water in a glass that you won't mistake for your tea. We're going to cover in the class today, firstly, brush strokes. We're going to use your 3 brushes that you have and look at creating different brush strokes and different widths of strokes with those. 2, we're going to be looking at the colour wheel. We're going to be looking at mixing colours in your palette. And 3, we're going to be looking at adding water to your watercolours. And 4, we're going to be looking at using white space to communicate your illustration effectively. So you don't have to do all the work with the paints. You can let the paper shine through and do that instead. Let's get started. So first of all, your paintbrushes will be not flexible yet, and that's because they're still covered in their protective coating. And how you get rid of that is you just dip it in your water and bounce the bristles from the bottom of the glass, and that should loosen them up. And you can drain off that water there, roll it around on the kitchen towel, and then you should have a nice malleable brush tip. So we're going to have a look at different brush strokes. So first of all, I want you to just pick a colour from your palette. I'm going to pick purple. And how watercolours work are the pigment is contained within these blocks, and you're suspending that pigment into the water to make a paint, and as it dries it deposits the pigment onto the paper. So get the colour you want to use nice and wet in the palette, and then you should be ready to get started. So first of all, I want you to do really as thin as you possibly can brush strokes, and then just add a little bit more pressure as you go along. And they should start to get thicker as the bristles in the brush splay out and spread that paint more. You can go for a really large stroke by putting your brush side on and slipping it down like that. Brilliant. Now, when you're finished with your brush, to wash it, you just bounce the bristles on the bottom of the cup again. And you'll probably have to change your water a few times during this because yes, then that way your colours will be brighter. So you can see on my kitchen towel that some of the purple is still coming out, so that means it needs a bit more of a wash. I'm just going to go back and do that again. You don't want to leave your watercolour brushes in the cup of water because that will bend them out of shape and the bristles won't be quite right for painting. So it's almost clean, but I'm going to carry on using this brush. So if it was the end of the session, I would clean it even more so, but as it's not, I'm just going to keep going. So now with the medium-sized brush, I'm just going to do the same exercise and just apply more pressure as I go along and create thicker and thicker brush strokes. And I won't be able to be as thick as on the brush I used before because that was much bigger. So that's to be expected. I'm going to have another go at doing a tiny one. There we go. You'll find that different brushes suit different hands and different people. So obviously the bigger brush is more my friend today. And that's why I could get a thinner line with it. But that will be different for all of you. Now I want you to take your smallest brush and we're just going to do the exact same thing. So make a nice thin line. So if you hold your brush like a pencil, then you'll have more control over it. And that is going to be as thick as this is going to go. There you have it. Different brush strokes with each of the 3 brushes. Now we're going to have a look at dry brush strokes. So with watercolours there are 4 types of brush strokes you can do, and this one will be dry on dry. So my brush is still damp from before, and so is the purple in my palette, so I'm just going to sweep that up. So I've added the pigment to the brush, but there's not a lot of water involved. So when I go to make brush strokes on the page, you'll see that the divots in the paper are visible because the paint isn't wet and it isn't filling those little bits. And this is a really useful technique if you want to have some texture in your painting. So that's very dry paint with the paper also dry. If your brush strokes are still coming out too wet, you can just blot it on your kitchen towel to get rid of the excess water. So that is dry on dry. Then wet on dry is what we started off doing with these brush strokes. You can also do dry on wet. So I'll just quickly show you. And you're just going to get a bit of your water and brush it onto the paper so the paper is holding some of that water there. And then using a drier brush, I'm going to pick up some colour. And if you did this paintbrush mark on a normal bit of paper, you'd see that it's not quite filling all the spaces that it would do if it was a wet mix. But now you can do those brush strokes on the piece of the paper that you pre-wetted it. And you can see you get a much fuzzier brush stroke, much more delicate brush stroke. So that's a really good way of detailing bits in flowers, for instance, that don't have sharp lines of colour in them. And the final brush stroke that I'm going to show you, wet on wet, I will show you in a little bit. Please do follow along as I'm doing this because, yeah, you're just getting to know your palette. I'm just going to do a couple of tornado strokes. So I'm just going to get the purple in the palette nice and wet again. And then sweep it from left to right down the paper. And depending how much pigment you have loaded on your brush, so if I do it again without adding more pigment, some of the pigment will dissipate as you go down. Yeah, it's just a nice stroke, good way of covering a lot of area in one go. Now I'm going to have a go at an S stroke. So with this brush stroke, you can really use the brush itself to help you. So I'm going to try and do this in a way that you can see it. I'm going to let the curve of the brush determine the curve of my S stroke. Like so. and the brush has just dried out a bit. If you've got drier paint in an area and you don't want that, just wet your brush slightly. And that's the good thing about watercolour, you can just go over an area and kind of reanimate the pigment and move it around so it will fill in those gaps. And if you've got too much paint in the S, what you can do is you can clean your brush, dry it out on the kitchen roll, and then almost like suck up the paint with the brush itself. So you can change where the puddles form. Brilliant. So those are the different kinds of brush strokes you can do. Now we're going to look at mixing our colours, so please do follow along at the same time. For now you can see I've put out the lid of the watercolour tin, and that is because I'm going to use this lid to mix the colours in. So we're only going to use 3 colours from the palette, and the rest we're going to use by mixing them together to create all the colours of the rainbow. And this is useful because sometimes the colours in the palette aren't the exact colour you're after, and this is just a quick refresher in how to mix your own colours. So I'm going to start by actually making it a little clock face. So we've got 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock, okay, so I've got my little clock face here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip my brush in the water, get some yellow. I'm going to use the only yellow that's in the palette. This is why it's useful, because there's hundreds of yellows out there, and this will help you be able to mix whichever yellow you wish to. So I'm going to put a nice stripe of yellow in at 12 o'clock. And then thoroughly wash my brush. Get rid of the excess water. And now we're going to get some red. And we're going to put the red in at 4 o'clock. Wash the brush. And then get some blue. So I'm just putting the 3 primary colours, yellow, red and blue, in a kind of triangle. And what we're going to do now is we are going to mix the in-between steps with the colours that are adjacent to it. So now we've got 12, 4 and 8. In the middle of 12 and 4, or yellow and red, we're going to make our own orange using this yellow and this red from our palette. Now, not all colours are the same strength, so it's not necessarily 50-50 of yellow and red, and actually the yellow is quite a weak colour, so you want to get loads of it. So you wet your brush, go over to the palette, stroke the brush over the palette, pick up as much colour as you can, and then dab that into your tin lid. And you want to get a nice amount of this first colour mixed, because we're going to use this again to fill in the gaps in between when mixed with the colour from before. So we've got a lot of yellow there. Now you want to wash your brush, because if you don't wash your brush in between these steps, you start getting colour all over the other colours in the palette, and it is much harder to see them. If you do end up doing this, it's no problem at all. You can use a bit of wet kitchen roll and just wipe the colour in the palette, or you can use a brush to clean it off. So now I'm going to add a little bit of red. So I'm just going to get it on my brush like so, and then mix it in to the yellow that I've already mixed. And you can see that it took way less red than the yellow to make this colour. So I'm going to put this orange in at number 2. There we go. So you're going to do the exact same thing for 6 o'clock, mixing the red and the blue, and for 10 o'clock, mixing the blue and the yellow. Okay, now we're just going to continue to fill in the colour wheel by mixing the adjacent two colours together. So for 1 it will be the yellow and the orange mix you made, 2 will be the orange mix and red. So each time you only want to use half of the amount of the colour you've mixed to make the new colour. So you still have the other half left to make the next spot. And just continue round filling those in and you'll have your colour wheel. The great thing about watercolours, even if they dry in your palette lid, they only take a bit of water to reanimate. They don't dry out and become unusable like other paints. There you have it, your colour wheel. A really nice extra thing to know about watercolours is that traditionally watercolourists did not use the white or the black in their palettes, stating that the white of the paper was the white and that black was never truly black. You could always look and see that it had a hue of brown or purple or blue. But you have to know the rules to break the rules, and we have those colours, so I just want to do a really quick demonstration and show you how to make pink using white and using the white of your paper. So first of all, I'm going to get quite a lot of the white on the palette, move it over to the lid, and then just cheekily get a little bit of red and mix that in. And there you have very light pink. Now, you can actually achieve this just with using the red very diluted with water. So I'm going to get my brush nice and wet, just pick up a very small amount of red. I'm going to use the lid and use this end of the lid just to make sure that I've got it really nicely diluted, like so. And then use that in the middle. You can see that you can have a pink either way. This is quite a watery pink, but again, we can dry off our brushes and suck up the excess water. And depending on how much pigment is suspended in the water is how bright your pink will be until it goes all the way up to red. So it's a quick demo. Okay, Now we're going to look at the last style of brush strokes, which I promised I'd show you earlier, which is wet on wet. So you want to take a clean brush and some water and just brush it over the paper and get that nice and wet. And with this paper and any paper, don't want to go over it too many times, otherwise you can get in trouble and the paper will start coming away. So if it's starting to do that, leave it, let it dry completely, and then come back to it. And then I'm going to get a bit of colour, really wet on my brush as well, and just sweep that across the top, and you can see the currents of the water have taken that and made it flow out, and this is called a bloom, and when it dries it will dry beautifully like that as well. And this is also really great for making kind of gradient ombre. So if I just do this here and down there, clean my brush, and then aim for a nice orange like a sunset. Make sure my brush is nice and wet too, and then sweep that along the bottom, and then just combine it into the middle section, and then you can clean your brush, dry it off, and get rid of any excess pigment you don't want there. Dab that off onto your kitchen towel. And you can carry on manipulating the paint for a longer time than normal because of the wet on wet technique. You can get a nice gradient there. It's a bit more like a sunset. If you have a bit like here where I've made a mistake, and I don't want that on my piece of paper, what you can do is you can really clean your brush, keep it nice and damp, and just sweep it over the area, and then dab it with a bit of kitchen towel. It won't remove it completely, but it will remove some of it, and then you can go back and paint over it after. Let it dry thoroughly before you do. Brilliant. And now we're going to do a little quick demo, and please paint along at the same time, looking at how to use white space and the white of the paper to your advantage. You don't have to fill your page with paint to be able to show where light is. You can use the paper itself. So there's a little picture of some leaves in your booklet, this guy, and I want you to try and paint this using only one colour from your palette. It doesn't have to be green, and only using that one colour and leaving bits blank to denote the lighter parts of the leaf. There we go. So here, I've done this very quickly, but it's just a quick exercise. And so I'm just going to use the end of my brush. It's a bit damp, just kind of tidy up those edges and make it look like one leaf rather than a fern. There we go. I've used the white space to translate the lighter parts of the leaf. Well done for getting this far. You've done lots of different techniques, and now it's time to try it out. So we've got some pictures in the back of your booklet that are great places to start. And what I would say is pick one of these, or if you prefer, pick a foliage scene from a magazine or a picture that you'd like to have a go at painting. And my tips for this would be start by mapping out the whole of the picture in very pale, very watery, but not too watery so that it takes a long time to dry, but watery in the sense of letting the water make the colour paler. And just use those really pale colours to map out your picture first, and then just go around and add more bits of detail as you go. And that way you can keep adding to it as long as you want and building the picture up, but you never feel overwhelmed by a big blank space that you haven't tackled yet. I would suggest to go from a lighter colour to a darker colour, your lighter colours in general to darker colours, because the darker colours will block out the lighter colours underneath. So you want to plot those where those lighter colours are going first, and then paint around them with the darker colours. If you have a background colour, you can always put it in last of all and just bring the paint and meet almost to the edges of the drawing. So you don't have to paint every square centimetre of paper. Leaving some white space can be really nice and a really nice effect. I would also say that if you've painted an area and it's still wet, then any paint that goes near it that catches that little current may make your colours bleed into one another. So do let one area dry if you want to do some precise work near it in a different colour. Just let the first bit dry and paint another part, and then come back to it, and that way the colours won't bleed together. Brilliant! Enjoy your painting. And there you have it. You have your watercolour image. Did such a great job. And well, I'm sure you did. I can't see, but I bet you did. I hope you really enjoyed yourselves, and yeah, we'll hopefully carry on painting in your sketchbook for many more evenings and weekends. Do find inspiration online. MYO and Creative Jungle have their own Pinterest boards, so you can use those to find more pictures to paint. We also have some really great Instagram accounts to follow that's written down in your leaflet. I'm Hobbins with 3 B's on Instagram. I hope you've had fun today, and thank you so much. See you soon.
And there you have it, guys. Well done. We'd absolutely love to see what you've made, so please tag us at Creative Jungle Co on Instagram and hashtag Creative Jungle Mix so we can see what you and everybody else has made today.
And if you've any questions at all, be sure to message us on Instagram or drop us an email. Well done.